Hello everybody, this is Michael Hollands for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to once again be joined by Harry Gregson-Williams. Over the course of his long and great career, Harry has scored films such as The Replacement Killers, Smilla Sense of Snow, Shrek, Enemy of the State, The Chronicles of Narnia, X-Men Origins Wolverine, The Equalizer, The Martian, Kingdom of Heaven, Gone Baby Gone, Spy Game, Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas, Veronica Guerin, The Number 23, the remake of Total Recall, Man on Fire, Domino, Deja Vu, Mulan, The Last Duel, Disney Natures, Monkey Kingdom, Polar Bear, and Penguins. The Meg, The Taking of Pelham 123, Unstoppable, Return to Space, Retribution, the HBO series The Gilded Age, and many more. On today's episode, we will discuss his latest collaboration with Ridley Scott on Gladiator II. It is my pleasure to welcome back Harry Gregson-Williams.
Thank you very much, Michael. Good to be here.
It's great to have you back on my show. Thank you very much for taking your time out of your schedule.
No problem.
Great. And we've spoken several times in the past. And as I mentioned in my introduction, you worked with Ridley quite a lot. Did Ridley actually call you out of the blue for this film, or did he let you know ahead of time that he wanted to have you back, if I may ask?
Well, he called me ahead of time a bit, but whether that was out of the blue or not, I don't know. You know, there's a lot of choice for director, like Ridley Scott. He's worked with, Vangelis, Jerry Goldsmith, Hans Zimmer,
Mark Streitenfeld.
Mark Streitenfeld. You know, many composers. So. I'm aware that he has a choice, and there's a saying in English, horses for courses, you know, that meaning, perhaps the assignment suits one composer better than it does another. I don't know. I suppose Gladiator II is more similar to Kingdom of Heaven on The Last Duel than it is to, a movie he didn't ask me to do. It was certainly a surprise, and a nice surprise at that. I don't expect a call from Sir Ridley Scott, but when I do get one, it's a pleasure. I had seen that he was shooting Gladiator II in Malta, and I wondered to myself who the composer would be, simply because I had a feeling Hans wouldn't be doing it. So yeah, when he called me, I was delighted to say yes, of course, immediately.
Thank you, Harry. And I'm curious, how much research was actually done on your part before one note had even been written?
Well, research, yes, I think that's probably a fancy word for preparation. I like to go into my scores prepared, and by that I mean, I tend to lay out a sonic template for what I'm going to do. And that's kind of dependent on the music I'm going to write. And the music I'm going to write is kind of dependent on the sonic template I choose. So that's all part of the preparation. I suppose one of the things I did was to watch the original Gladiator again. I had seen it, I guess, when it came out all those years ago. And I liked it. I was familiar with the main theme that Hans had written, and with the contribution that Lisa Gerrard had made vocally. So I rewatched that and got myself more familiar with what had happened in that movie. And I started casting about for vocalists myself. My first stop wasn't Lisa Gerrard, although I knew that I would want to make that call to her at some stage. But because, why wouldn't I want to use such a beautiful, ethereal, spiritual voice, and such a trademark of this property, Gladiator? So I knew I would want to use Lisa, probably in a very limited capacity, but that didn't seem like the best place to start, because it was a given that I would want to use her. And I did want to use quite a few different featured vocalists and instrumentalists. So it's no good researching what instruments would have been used during Roman times, because that would leave me with some very, very limited instrumentation to score this movie. Um, I knew I wasn't going to make it a synth score. It wasn't going to be phone booth or something like that, spy game. No, I wanted to be able to help tell the story and contribute to the building of this world again. And for that, there are a number of instrumentalists I contacted and said, look, heads up, I'll be writing some music and I'll be wanting to record you, namely Hugh Marsh, an electric violinist, Martin Tillman, electric cello, Hamid Saidi, Cantelli and Santor, and Abraham Copiro Lopez is a chap I found him on YouTube. I was looking at sort of ancient sounding instruments. They didn't, in my book, have to be authentic to the period, but I wanted to color the score with as much flavor that would give the viewer the sense of being cast back all those years to Roman times. And Abraham, I found, was an instrument maker and an instrument player of great quality. He lives in northern Spain, and in particular, he played a lot of ethnic woodwinds, a carnix, which is a wonderful looking instrument, huge instrument, some war horns, and some big shells of different descriptions, kind of like conches. These sort of things. And he seemed to be, he's, as I say, he builds these instruments and plays them. So I contacted him and I made a trip to northern Spain to record him. Very early on in the process, I had only written, I think, 2 or 3 meaningful cues at that point. And although I didn't necessarily want him to play on all the music I had written to that point, I wanted to establish whether I could integrate the sounds that he could make within my score. So I traveled over there and recorded him, a very interesting guy and a very interesting setup in a rural field in Spain, in his farmhouse. Behind his house, he had a recording studio. It was extraordinary, really. And I had him play on all the instruments that he'd laid out that day for me, and brought those sounds back with me, both those recordings back with me to my studio here in Santa Monica to play with. It's like a child collecting his sand toys together to be in a sand pit. That's very much the joy of working on a movie like this, where it's a make-believe world, yet it's based on what we know of Roman times. So the Colosseum did exist. These gladiators did go through these experiences. Some of the people in charge were crazy and demanding. So actually, on that trip, I made a quick stop in Zurich to record my friend Martin Tillman electric cello. A lot of these recordings I brought back, and they don't exist in the final score as they were played at that time. That was really my research, my experimentation period. So I was just getting a feel for what some of these featured musicians could do for the score. And at that point, Ridley, he didn't have a final movie for me at that time. I probably started a year before the movie came out, so plenty of time. And along with these instrumentalists, I started experimenting with vocalists as well. Grace Davison, I had, who's a wonderful soprano, a leading soprano in the UK, who sang on my score for Ridley's The Last Duel, and really impressed me. She contributed, and I knew I needed various ethnic vocals, Northern African, Mediterranean vocals. So gradually, as I started writing music for a lot of the scenes that I knew were going to be cut down and edited and perhaps deleted in their entirety, you have to start somewhere as a composer. One doesn't wait until you're presented with a fine cut of the film, because that would be far too late. There's about 100 minutes of music necessary in a film like this, and so to start early and not worry too much about writing music to a scene that you're almost inevitably going to have to revisit at some stage when perhaps the scene gets shortened. It may get reshot. It may get shuffled to another part of the film. And all these things happened. But I think starting early enough in the process, that gives me enough time to be able to play Ridley music that he doesn't feel he's got a gun to his head. I'm not recording the orchestra the following Monday. No, this is months in advance, where he has the chance to express himself. I have a chance to reflect on what I'm doing and perhaps feel I could do something far better, or I could try a different way of doing something. So with plenty of time comes plenty of experimentation. Vocally, as I say, just following that train of thought for a moment. So plenty of featured instrumentalists and colors in that respect. But vocally, I really wanted to find some special voices that I could record and then have in my system here in Cubase, which is just the tool I use to compose with, so that I could cut them about, experiment with them, play with the sonic texture of them, and play with the placement of them within the film. So I found an Ethiopian singer. I have his name written down here somewhere because he's known as Ao. Lovely chap, quite an old man. He came stumbling up my steps into my studio one day, and he sang over a couple of scenes that featured the chieftain of the Numidians towards the beginning of the film, and I loved what he was able to give me. The one of the most interesting journeys on this film for me was finding the right texture and emotion for Arashat's character, who is pretty much the MacGuffin, as they say, of the movie. She's the reason that Lucius wants some revenge. He wants to go and find this general whose soldiers killed her at the beginning of the film. He loses her at the beginning of the film, and he's driven by that event forwards. I had a friend of mine helping me look for some sort of a North African vocal that I could experiment with over Arashat scenes. And he asked me one day, did you you should have a listen to this. It was an a cappella piece on Spotify, and it was by a vocalist known as Gigi. And I was really struck by the quality of her voice, and sort of geographically, she fit in with what I was looking for, Northern African, sort of Mediterranean voice. So we set about trying to find her, but no one could locate this lady. The track that I'd been listening to on Spotify or whatever it was taken from a score that was written 25 years ago, or a score that she sang on a long time ago, and we really couldn't find her. And in the absence of pulling her into my studio, I thought, well, I'll just sample her. So because I had become really invested in one particular 8-second bit of the song that she sings. So I did that, and of course I had to phone the Paramount Music department and say, look, could you license this little snippet, because I really want to use it within the score. So that's what I did, and you hear that towards the beginning of the film. But because Lucius is driven forward through this film, and his story really begins with Arashat, and what happens to her is kind of the reason he's driven forward. Throughout the film, Ridley put in little moments where he's reminded of her, or there's actually we hear her voice very late in the film, reminding us of her presence. I was able to reprise this little nugget that I had put together. So yeah, we had great fun finding different contributors to the score, and of course, one of the main things uh, I had to circumvent was whether or not to use Hans's main theme from the first movie, and if so, where. Um, when I first saw uh, a rough cut of the movie, on the very end, as it appears in the final film, is the Hans and Lisa Gerard song "Now We Are Free." So that choice was nothing to do with me, and I liked it there. I loved it. I didn't try and replace it. I wasn't asked to. That was what really wanted there. But notwithstanding that, where within the score, within the film, could I use Hans's main theme? And it wasn't such a puzzle to put together because Ridley had told me we didn't want to overuse it. We wanted to honor it, if you like. So we found a couple of spots, one in the middle of the film and one towards the end of the film when Lucius is giving a big speech, where the theme that I had written for Lucius, which we hear throughout the film, building throughout the film, actually kind of becomes Maximus's theme from the first movie, and that was what we set out to do, was to give the audience a theme for Lucius that put them in mind, perhaps, of Hans's theme, but wasn't that. That at a certain moment towards the end of the film, we'd be able to almost make one become the other. So that's what we headed towards. That was our concept.
Thank you very much, Harry. The film is about 2.5 hours long. You mentioned you had to write 100 minutes of music, which is a
That's
lot.
right.
Which key areas of the film did you try to focus on at first, or did you have to focus on at first to really set the tone in order to really find out how to structure your day's work so you could write efficiently?
Uh, yeah, that's always assuming I'm an efficient writer. I'm sure I could be more efficient. What did I start with? I started with the first scene that Ridley sent me. He didn't send me the complete film to begin with. He sent me the Roman invasion of Numidia right at the beginning of the film. So when I first got to the film, there was no prologue, there was no overture, there was no animated title sequence at the beginning of the movie. We die, we dive straight into this battle that occurs. And of course, the first cut that I got of that was a little longer. You know, it was 2 or 3 minutes longer than the end product was, but I knew that going in, and it was a great place for me to start. So yes, I cranked up my BPM. I decided that in order to push myself slightly out of my comfort zone, I'd engage a 7/8 time signature as opposed to a 4/4/1, which I was tempted to do. And that served me pretty well, actually. I was really happy to have done that. One of the thematic elements that I appreciated when I first heard it, and then when I revisited Hans's original score, was in his big old Germanic main theme. There's this kind of descending seventh figure. And I thought, well, what if I use that diving seventh within my Lucius theme, and that can be something that would help me towards the end of the film when I want my theme to morph into Hans's theme. If we are already hearing this diving seventh, but in a slightly different context, obviously. So we first hear that. That's where I first threw this thing in during the battle, the naval battle at the beginning of the movie. And I had great fun with that. And I could see how I could utilize that throughout the film.
You just mentioned the animated title sequence, and
Yeah.
at what point did you learn about that sequence? How quickly did you have to take care of that one?
That came to me very late. As I say, for many months, the movie started. The movie started at the beginning of the movie. The action started. Uh, but at some point, quite close to when I had to be finished and get on a plane and go to Abbey Road to record the score, Ridley came up with that sequence, and I loved it. I really loved it. The animation, I think, is by the same person who did his company logo, which of course happens just before that happens at the beginning of the movie. Um, it's by that artist. I really liked it a lot. And what's not to like as a composer? There's no dialogue. There's very little sound. It's just music. So Ridley called me and said, "Look, I think we need an overture here." So I got right on that.
We talked about this before, and as I understand, Ridley Scott tries to avoid speaking in musical terms, so he doesn't use, E flats or major, minor. He doesn't talk. He doesn't talk that way. On Gladiator II, which words would he use when it came to describing a potential approach or what he wanted to discuss with you?
Yeah, I can't remember specifics, but when presenting music with Ridley Scott, it's always a positive experience. Has always been for me a positive experience. Even if he's not particularly in love with something, he'll usually find something that he does like about the music that he's just heard, and focus on that. He's very clear about what he wants. It's all about story. It's all about story and how the insightful he is with me about how I can contribute to that story. Um, there was an interesting occasion on, I suppose, halfway through scoring this movie. I started focusing on Lucilla, Lucius's mother, her character, and there are a couple of very quiet, controlled scenes that she has with her lover and with her son. Um, and they're slightly different contexts, but they have a lot of poise, these scenes. So I had written some thematic material for Lucilla, and really, really liked it. It was quite simple and hopefully evocative of everything that Lucilla is hoping for. She's hoping for reconciliation. She's hoping with her son. Really liked the music that I'd written for a couple of these scenes, but I felt that I wanted to push it a little bit further and see if I could find a vocalist to contribute to the sound of this score um, in those moments. And a friend of mine who actually lives in Tasmania, Andy Page, he had said to me a few months earlier when I had been casting my net far and wide trying to find different vocalists that would be great to use. He had mentioned this Australian singer-songwriter called Leo Attar. Now I had followed that lead up and listened to some of his songs on Spotify or whatever it was, and really liked them, but didn't find anything appropriate for my needs. However, yeah, this friend of mine, Andy, called me and said, "Look, listen, I went to a concert that Leo did somewhere in Australia, and he did this remarkable thing where he sang falsetto, so he sang in the pitch of a woman, a female." Um, you should get in touch with them, see what might come. So I did that. I took his advice, and I spoke to the lovely chap, very open to collaborate. Um, and I said to him, anything you do, we can do this as a co-write. We'll share the writing credit on these songs, if they can be used. So I sent him my thematic material. I couldn't send him the film, obviously, for security reasons. But I talked him through what I'd like to hear, and he went away and found a studio recorded some vocals, sent them back to me, and I absolutely loved it. I really, really loved it. I was so happy with some very unusual texture he brought to the music. Um, so I dealt with it. I edited it. I had him redo some things in more of a way that would work for me in these moments of score. And I presented it to Ridley. And I didn't mention that it was a man singing like a female. That seemed irrelevant. It's really about the emotional thrust of the music. And Ridley said, "But Harry, I like I like it. I think you're pushing the emotion too hard in these scenes now with this added vocal. I like the music exactly as you have it." So these things happen as a composer. You kind of fall in love with something, and occasionally you find yourself not being able to go down that path. Um, um, but actually, I came around the back door a little bit sneakily, and I put that piece in the end titles. So you do hear your singing on the score, and actually, you hear it in all its glory because there's no dialogue. It's during the end crawl. But these things are sent to challenge us, and sometimes as a composer one has to just understand that serving the film sometimes what we would really like to do musically isn't necessarily going to work out and help tell the story. I mean, that's one of many occasions where I have gone back to a piece of music. I've improved it in my eyes and played it for Ridley, and he's been great. That's fantastic. But on this occasion, he was scared of going too far with the emotion over this particular character, and I respected that. And I think he was right when I saw the finished film. Um, I think he was absolutely right.
That's interesting because you mentioned that Ridley told you you may be pushing it too hard in terms of the emotion. I think it can be really hard and tricky to figure out when a less is more approach is more appropriate as opposed to, being on the nose.
I have found over the course of 25 or 30 years of working with all sorts of directors and filmmakers and producers that generally speaking, if I'm asked to do something different, it's usually in terms of the amount of emotion being brought through the music. It's usually to go further. I think I'm quite subtle, and I like subtlety. That's what I like. I like to be subtle and give the audience some credit for understanding and for receiving the emotional push that the score is giving them without going too far. But I can think of many occasions where I'm like, no, 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 go further, give me more. Yeah, tap into the emotion more. And sometimes I look back on it and thought that's quite on the nose. I wish I didn't have to do that. But with Ridley, that hasn't been the case at all. I'm usually quite well in tune with his sense of the amount of emotion that he wants from the score, which is not usually overbearing. So I'm very happy with that. But yes, I can think of many occasions on scores I've done for other people in the past where my instinct has been to go to a certain point, but the instinct of the director has been that it needs to go further, and they may well have been right on many of those occasions.
You mentioned that you had 1 year, or you spent at least 1 year writing music for the picture. Of course, that means that the film is not locked, so it's in flux, and you have to probably face a couple of re-edits. Which challenges did this entail on this picture when you have to, let's say, write a cue once more, or the edit has changed again, and how do you adjust to that?
I mean, rarely have I had to, did I rewrite something? I'm not sure I had to rewrite something from beginning to end, but I'm constantly trying to improve the music anyhow. So there's a little bit of me that is on a daily basis going back before I go forward. I'd like to pull up a cue that I wrote, 3 or 4 weeks ago. I find that the edit has slightly changed anyhow, so I need to revisit it. And I have a really good team around me, and that they keep an eye on the edit very closely, so that I'll be told Harry, you need to go back to this cue. I know it's been approved and really likes it, but it doesn't seem to be working anymore. There's something that's different about the scene. So I'm constantly going back, just checking that we're in the right place with stuff that's already been written. And then obviously, with such a huge amount of music that needs to be written, we charge forward as much as possible.
We talked about the vocals, we talked about the other solo instruments, and of course the huge orchestration. How did you figure out on this particular film when it's most appropriate to go for a solo instrument as opposed to full orchestra, or let's go for a solo vocal as opposed to a choir? How do you feel what's right?
For instance, going back to what we were just discussing about Lucilla's thematic material, which didn't have Lior on it in the final cut of the film, and I think quite rightly didn't. We didn't need that there. I did feel that the warmth and depth of the muted strings that I was going to record at Abbey Road and did record at Abbey Road for those scenes might just be too comfortable, particularly in one of the scenes with Lucilla and Lucius in she comes to visit him in his cell, and he rejects her as her mother. He doesn't want anything to do with her. And I'd written the musically, harmonically, and thematically, it all seemed to be working for me. But when I projected forward a few months or weeks or whatever it was to the recording I would do at Abbey Road, I know I've recorded there so much, fortunately, that I do know the sound that I would get. Now, I could get the orchestra to play in this kind of frosty, quite cold way. But I decided at that point that I needed to employ a group of viol gambas, called fretwork. Now, I'd used them on Kingdom of Heaven years before. So they're kind of the precursors to the violin, the viola, and the cello. They're more ancient instruments. And they're not played with vibrato. They have a kind of frosty, chilly sound, quite cold. And there's something about them, the sonic texture of a viol, that gives me the feeling that they're ancient. Now, are they any closer they're a little closer to the Roman Empire in terms of when they would have actually been authentically used. But they're not, the Romans didn't have those instruments any more than they had any of the instruments I used. But there's something about the way that they sound. There's something ancient in the way they weave their way. So what I decided was to record them playing the exact same music that I would have the string orchestra, the regular orchestra play, and that I would mix them just in front of the orchestra. And that gave me the effect that I was after. So, yeah, I think that kind of answers your question. I mean, with vocals, similarly, it was very clear to me where and when I wanted to use Lisa Gerrard, for instance. I wanted to put her right at the front of the film to bring people back to the original film. If they had seen the film, they would absolutely have a nice warm and fuzzy feeling about that. And I think we used her in one other spot in the score. And with the other solo vocalists and solo, as opposed to choral aspects, if you've got a bunch of angry baboons screaming around on screen, I don't think a solo voice is really going to cut it. So it's pretty obvious you've got to go for a choir, or any of the major battle scenes. I needed, I actually employed two choirs, one huge choir, the Bach choir in London, who I first used, I think, on Kingdom of Heaven, and then on many Shreks and all sorts of movies, Narnia. A wonderful choir, but big, like 80 or 100 people. And for the more focused moments, I had a much smaller choir, the Apollo voices, and they're more focused, perhaps a little bit more accurate, and the sound is more precise for more intimate moments.
Harry, thank you very much for doing one more interview. And
oh, you're welcome.
Is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up for today?
No, other than I feel very happy to have done Gladiator 2. I must say, it's easy for me to say that now. I was pretty anxious when I was asked to do it, and before I'd written a note. It can't go unsaid that Hans Zimmer is not only my ex-boss, but he's my kind of mentor. So to have to step in his shoes um, was quite intimidating, to put it mildly. But he was very supportive, and he told me he thought I was probably the best person suited to doing this, apart from him.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah, but, well, I think it's only natural to be a bit apprehensive about it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, and any Ridley movie, any assignment I take seriously. But with Sir Ridley Scott, I'm very well aware it's a big opportunity, and I've been very fortunate to do it.
Great. Harry, thanks again. I had a great time talking to you again, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much, Michael.
Take care. Let's talk soon. Bye bye.